So I was recently brought this Honda by a coworker, and he wants me to diagnose or figure out why it's leaking a bunch of oil. Most likely it's leaking from the sump gasket right here, which goes around the entire base of the motor where it splits in half. And it's probably leaking from the bottom crank seal as well. You guys can see how much oil is on this thing. So the first thing we're gonna do is drain all the oil out of it. I did just spray it off with the hose, but I didn't get everything. We're gonna drain all the oil, drain the gas. It's got oil in it. Not really a whole lot of oil in it though. 14mm socket. Alright, so the first thing we'll do is disconnect this cable. Pull that out. Now we have to pull off this access cover. And we also have now we can get to the blade clutch. And for this, it's a little bit simpler. Same 14mm socket. We're just going to pull this off and try and keep it in the same order that it came off. So what I'm going to do is just put it in this bucket like that. And this thing is nasty. You don't want to lose this key either. This machine has been leaking for a long time. Take these 3 bolts out. Do your best not to lose them. Look at all that crap. We've got this clutch cable here that I can't even see how to get it out because it's so dirty in here. But on this side, we have a spring, which is almost impossible to get to because of all the dirt. Okay, spring's off. Looks like we've got another spring on this side too. So we don't lose anything. Put that back in. There we go. Much better. There's the rest of the clutch. So the other thing I'm worried about on this machine is obviously the sump cover seal could be leaking. This seal could be leaking as well. But the other thing that could have happened, which is almost impossible for me to tell, is if the block cracked. And if that happened, it's not worth fixing. I've already price checked a new sump cover, or new oil sump, and they're 160 bucks. 12 millimeter. You guys can see how oily and nasty it is. Now, there is a possibility that it is leaking out of the top, but most likely it's leaking down here somewhere. What I'm going to do now is pull off the top cover, and I'm just going to do that just to make sure that it's not leaking out of anywhere else. I don't really want to get too far ahead of myself if there's more going on with this than I originally thought. And of course, we've got a Black Widow, as usual. A little bit of carb spray ought to do the trick. Yeah, I think I'm gonna pull this flywheel off. I just want to be sure. This thing is really rusty. Grab my puller. There it is. Definitely dirty under here, but I don't know that it's leaking from anywhere up here. Yeah, I think we're okay with the flywheel. I'm not really worried about this. That looks really clean. There's not a whole, I mean, there's dirt in here, but it's not oily, it's not wet. So I'm just gonna leave this as is. It's good to inspect for sure. Throw this back on. This got these nubs on it. This again can only go on one way. Clean that out. There we go. Put this back on good and tight. Good enough. And while we're here, I'm looking at the gap in between the coil and the flywheel, and it looks good. It actually looks perfect. It's only supposed to be about 10 thousandths or something like that. It's not very much, but that one looks good. So as we can see here, even though I just cleaned off the sump, it appears to be leaking out of this seal. It's very common as a small engine ages that seal leaks. I've replaced I don't know how many of these now. but I'm just going to take off some of this dirt just to make sure that there's no hidden crack or something hiding in the block. I'm gonna flip this over. All the oil and gas has been drained out. Might still leak a little bit, but that's what I've got these mats out for. That's these aren't even tight. I have a strong suspicion that somebody was into this before. Didn't tighten these bolts up. They never come off this easy. Somebody's been into this, and this might just be our issue right here. So I've got a new gasket on order, but this looks like the issue is I can see around. Everything up here is dry along the edge, but everything down here is very wet with oil. I just like using a straight edge or a razor blade on these gaskets. Normally they come off pretty easy. All right, so I think I'm just gonna forego replacing that gasket and making some gasket maker with this 90-minute return to service stuff. The reason I'm gonna do that is because you're gonna get a better seal with a sort of RTV gasket maker than you would with the paper gasket. Now that being said, I'm going to clean up the surface area a bit more. Same with the sump. And hopefully we can get it all back together. This has, like I said, a 90-minute cure time. So what I'm going to do is clean all this up, put the gasket maker on the block. So here's the new seal. And very carefully, I'm going to try and pull this old one out. This thing should not be this easy to move around like this. It's quite possible that this machine was leaking from a couple different places. Yeah, it's literally just coming apart. They should not be this malleable. So, very possible that's where the leak was coming from. So with the new seal, you can get some oil on it just to make it install a tad easier. So this side up. So I'm just putting a nice bead around the outside, then I'll smooth it out with my finger. And all I'm doing is just making sure right now that we have enough of the surface area covered. So of course, what was locking up here is the crankshaft's wanting to push out the oil seal. So I'm gonna have to get a little creative and push this thing in, kind of like this. You guys can see the sump going down. But that oil seal is very important. So there we go. So we're just going to cinch some of these down, see if we have any issues. It appears to be sealed flush against the block. So I'm gonna let this thing cure for a little bit. I've got some other stuff I gotta do around here, so give it about an hour or two. We'll check it, see what's going on with it. But I might actually let this cure for a whole day because it is kind of cold out right now, and that can affect how this stuff will cure properly. So looking around, the flange, all the sealant is nice and evenly pressed out. So that's how you know you got a good seal. Everything looks more or less uniform. Everything looks good in there too. I don't know how much the camera can see, but I can see that it's all pressed out nice and evenly. All right, so put the motor back on. We're gonna slide the drive shaft back together. Make sure those splines go in just like that. Have a couple of these bolts go in from the underside here. So mower's flopped over, getting ready to put all this back together, making sure I have this all in order. What I'm gonna do is shoot this with a bunch of degreaser and just let it soak. Well, I cheated a little bit. I did use my ultrasonic cleaner, but it didn't do that good of a job fast enough. So there's the two discs. I just clean this off as well. I'm not going to reinstall these just yet. I want to let them dry first. But I found another use for a shopping cart. That's as a grill for pressure washing stuff. Don't worry, I did not spray any water into the bearings. Definitely a lot better than they were. But I'm just going to let them dry off a bit. All right, so back outside, getting ready to put everything back together. The only thing I've done is put the two bolts back into this bracket, and then the clutch cable is right where it should be. So I have the upper clutch assembly here and the clutch disc, which I am going to clean this off a little bit, but I want to get this stuff back on. So this one, we're just going to set in place. Probably have to take that Woodruff key out. Don't want to forget that. So this is going to go kind of back up and on like this. And of course, before you get everything back on, I almost forgot this washer. Like that. These need to go back on as well. Do that. Slide that up. What I'll do is just start it down here and then lift it up. There we go. But we have this ratchet that goes in. And I can see that, but the camera can't. So that's just gonna go there. And then these dirty bolts, which I should have cleaned, but these aren't that big of a deal. And you'll notice with the disc, just gonna have to line that up. So I'm just gonna grab some emery cloth or some sandpaper and clean this up a little bit. All right, so now we're gonna go back on with the rest of the clutch. And I printed out this page here off the internet just to, all we have to do now is make sure when you put the clutch on that these two holes right here line up with these nubs. That's very important. So what you're gonna have to do is probably use a good amount of force.
You don't have to stop there. He said keep impressing me.
That's done. And we just gotta put the blade bracket back on. All right. And just to finish up tomorrow, because it's starting to get a little dark, we'll put it back together and get some oil and gas in it and see how it runs. So continuing with putting everything back together, put the cable back in. And I think it was about to right there. Just to put the cover back on. That is a cover for the drive shaft, which we'll do that last. That doesn't need to go back on just yet, but the dipstick tube does. So we've got a rubber O-ring. Just gonna put some oil on it just to assist with the process. So the manual calls for 10W30, 10W40, or 20W50. I have an open container here at 10W30 on hand anyways, so that's what it's gonna get. 16 ounces of oil. Let's see what that gets us. The fact that this engine is completely drained, so we might have to put the full 20 in there. I just can't remember, and the manual doesn't specify if it's 12 or 20 ounces. So it looks like it is going to take the full 20. No big deal. Put another splash in it.